The night my husband leaned in at our own wedding and told me I was just a placeholder, something in me cracked. So quietly, even I almost missed the sound. Funny thing is, by then I had already signed the prenup, already filed the business papers, already tucked copies into my little fireproof lockbox like a woman bracing for a storm she hoped would never come. The DJ was playing an old love song, the kind our parents danced to. Fairy lights ran like stars along the ceiling, and the photographer kept shuffling us around, calling, "Closer, look in love, chin up, sweetheart." Plates clinked, glasses rang, someone's perfume drifted by in a powdery cloud. I remember thinking, this is it, Maya. You actually got to the altar. You didn't die alone with your cat and your spreadsheets. Ethan slid an arm around my waist for another photo, his palm firm over the small of my back. He leaned in, cheek warm against mine, cologne familiar by then, cedar and citrus. The scent I had taught myself meant safety. "Relax," he murmured, lips barely moving near my ear. "You're just a placeholder until my real life comes back." The flash went off at the exact same moment. Everyone around us cheered at whatever pose the photographer had captured. All they saw was a bride in a simple lace dress, head thrown back like she was laughing, husband pressed close, the picture of second chance romance. Nobody saw my stomach drop so hard it felt like someone had cut the floor out beneath me. For a second, the whole room tilted. The sweetness of the buttercream frosting on the cake turned cloying. The roses on the table suddenly smelled too heavy, like funeral flowers. Somewhere behind me, I heard the DJ's voice, half laughing into the mic. "Look at those newlyweds, y'all! Give 'em another round!" My smile stayed plastered in place. I had been practicing that smile for years, at difficult clients, at doctors, at bills. I knew how to lock my face into something polite while my insides did whatever they wanted. "What did you say?" I whispered back, barely moving my lips. Ethan already wasn't listening. He had turned away from me, arms still draped lazily around my waist as he waved at a couple of his friends near the bar. "Hey, Mark, drinks on me tonight, man!" Across the room, Jasmine sat at a round table with her folded arms resting on the white tablecloth. Her dress dusty rose, the color she'd pretended not to care about when I begged her to be my maid of honor, caught the light when she shifted. Our eyes met and her brows pinched together like she felt my heartbeat all the way from where she was sitting. My fingers tightened around the stem of my champagne flute. The cool glass felt slick under my palm. My tongue tasted bubbles and acid and a faint metallic edge of panic. "Speech! Speech!" someone chanted. The DJ laughed and tapped the mic. All right. If I don't give this mic to the bride, I think her daughter will tackle me. "Maya, can we hear from you? Just a few words?" Jasmine's eyes never left my face. She didn't clap or whistle like everyone else. Her hand went to her phone instead, as if she was ready to catch me if I fell. I stood, because that's what women like me do. We stand, even when our knees want to fold. The chiffon of my dress whispered against my legs as I rose. Ethan gave my hip a little squeeze, owning the moment. My mouth felt dry, my heart felt numb. I lifted my glass, and as I smiled at him, too wide, too calm, I wasn't thinking about the vows we'd exchanged an hour earlier. I was thinking about the weight of the fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet, about the crisp feel of the prenup pages Carla had slid across a diner table, about the business documents with my name, not him, typed in black ink on the line for majority owner. And I thought, not for the first time, about the night months earlier when he'd laughed and used that same word, placeholder, like a joke. Back then, I had pretended not to hear it. Later, alone, I had quietly decided that if that's what I was to him, then I would be the one to decide exactly when his time was up. I opened my mouth to speak, the room holding its breath, a sea of raised phones and raised glasses, and I realized something simple and sharp. I might look like the one on his arm, but he had no idea whose story he'd just walked into.
If you had walked into my house a year before that wedding, you probably wouldn't have thought, this woman is about to blow up her own marriage at a bar in front of half the town. You would have seen a small 2-bedroom place in a quiet suburb. Beige siding, a patchy front lawn I was forever battling, a wind chime Jasmine hated because it squeaked when the weather turned. Inside, you'd hear the low hum of the fridge that came with the house and never quite stopped rattling, and the old radio on the counter playing soft R&B from the 90s because I didn't like the silence. My life had become a collection of routines. Coffee at 6, rain or shine. The click of my old laptop booting up at the kitchen table. Patient files stacked in neat piles because most of my bookkeeping clients were doctors and therapists, each with a little sticky note in my handwriting. Dinner, usually for one, at that same scarred table with the corner Jasmine once carved her name into with a fork when she was 7.
I had been divorced for almost 10 years by then, long enough that when people said, "your ex," it took me a second to remember they meant Daniel, and not just some phase of my life I'd quietly folded away. He left when Jasmine was 13, right after she started looking him in the eye and asking questions he didn't want to answer. There had been money issues, other women, late nights that smelled like bars and bad decisions. When it ended, he took his half of very little and a good chunk of my trust. I worked 2 jobs for a while. Days at a small clinic, evenings doing books for whoever would pay on time. I packed lunches, clipped coupons, learned which week the grocery store put the good meat on sale. I paid the mortgage on that little house one stubborn check at a time, even when the washing machine died and the car needed new brakes in the same month. I told myself that love was something for women who hadn't already spent every ounce of themselves surviving. When Jasmine left for college, the house got very quiet. I remember those first weeks, setting out 2 plates by habit, then putting one back in the cabinet with a little laugh that sounded too loud, checking my phone at random times just to see if she had texted, standing in her empty doorway and watching dust dance in the afternoon sun. I told everyone I was fine. I was 43, then 44, then 45. I had my little business, my church on Sundays, my shows to binge in the evenings. I had peace, which was worth something. What I didn't have was anyone who walked in at 6 p.m. and asked, "How was your day?" I tried not to notice that missing part too much. Then I met Ethan. He showed up in my life on a hot July afternoon at a friend's backyard barbecue. The air smelled like charcoal and sunscreen, and kids ran through a plastic sprinkler in squealing circles. I was standing near the grill, balancing a flimsy paper plate and trying not to drop my baked beans, when a voice beside me said, "Those burgers need another 30 seconds. Trust me, I'm a professional." I looked up, and there he was, tall, tan, a little gray at his temples in a way that looked intentional rather than tired. He had one of those easy smiles women my age are not immune to, the kind that folds at the corners of the eyes and says, "I've been through things too." "You a chef now?" our mutual friend Lisa called from the patio. "Real estate," he said, without missing a beat. "But a man can have layers." He flipped the burgers with a practiced flick of his wrist, then turned back to me. "You're Maya, right? Lisa's tax wizard?" "Bookkeeper," I corrected automatically, then smiled to soften it. "But I do make a mean spreadsheet." He laughed like I was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. "I could use that. My books are a mess. I've got big deals happening, but ask me where the money actually is, and I have to call 3 people." He asked me about my work. Really asked, not just the polite, "and what do you do?" that floats in the air before people change the subject back to themselves. He wanted to know how I got into bookkeeping, how long I'd been on my own, if I liked working with doctors. He looked me in the eyes when I answered. It felt good. Too good, maybe. Looking back, the red flags were there like little warning lights at the edge of my vision. I just didn't want to see them blinking. He joked about me being so responsible it's almost boring when I passed on a second soda because I didn't want the sugar. He teased me for pulling out a fistful of coupons from my purse when we all decided to order pizza later. "Who even cuts coupons anymore?" he laughed. "You're like my mom in the 80s, but cute." He said it with his arm brushing mine, so I told myself it was flirting, not an insult. He made light comments about my gray hairs when the sun hit them. "You got these little silver streaks coming in," one evening as we walked to our cars after meeting for coffee. "I kind of like it. Makes you look wise, like a sexy librarian."
That word, sexy, coming from a man I thought was out of my league at first, did something to me. I shrugged and said, I earned every one of them. But inside, something warmed. Ethan's life, according to Ethan, was full of promise. He had a nice car, one of those glossy black SUVs that looks expensive even when you don't know the brand. He was always talking about deals that were about to close, investments that were about to pay off. When I asked concrete questions like, so what exactly do you do day to day, or how many properties do you own right now, he would wave a hand and say, it's complicated. Trust me, you'd be bored. It's all paperwork and phone calls. He praised my stability and my security a little too often. You have no idea how rare you are, he told me one night over dinner at a mid-range Italian place. Candlelight made his eyes seem softer. A woman with her own house, no crazy debt, an actual retirement account, that's like winning the lottery. I laughed, flattered, and uneasy at the same time. Well, the lottery didn't feel fun when I was working 2 jobs and falling asleep with my shoes still on. Yeah, but you did it. You stuck it out. I admire that.
Natural, conversational black woman in her early 40s, expressive and emotional, telling her own story with gentle pauses and varied tone. Jasmine met him a few weeks later when he came over to help me fix a cabinet door that had been hanging crooked for months. He arrived with a toolbox and a 6-pack, kissed my cheek in front of her like we'd been together for years, and spent the first 10 minutes telling a story about the time he almost closed a big deal in Miami. She listened, arms folded, then followed me into the kitchen. He's too slick, she whispered, keeping her voice low. And he watches you when you open your banking app. I frowned. He does not. Mama, she said, tilting her head toward the living room. Look. I peeked. Ethan was on the floor with his head inside the cabinet, pretending not to listen. His phone lay on the coffee table, screen dark. But his ears were sharp. When I stepped back into the room, he popped up and flashed that smile again. You good in there? He asked. You want a beer, Jazz? She shook her head and shot me a look I'd seen before, when she was 6 and I tried to pass off broccoli as little trees, when she was 16 and caught me pretending I wasn't crying in the laundry room. I'm fine, she said. Just watch your accounts, okay? I brushed her off, not because I thought she was wrong, but because I didn't want to be that woman, the one too damaged by her first marriage to let anyone new in, the one who pushed away a good thing because her daughter didn't like his cologne. There were good things, too. Cozy Sunday mornings when he'd show up with bagels and park himself at my kitchen table like he'd always been there. Movie nights where he pretended to hate my old romantic comedies, but quoted my favorite lines after enough time. Little fixes around the house, the cabinet door, the dripping faucet, the crooked shelf. Things I'd learned to live with because no one else was going to handle them. He slipped into my routines like he'd always been meant to fit there. An extra toothbrush in the bathroom, a jacket on the back of my dining chair, his laugh echoing through the hallway instead of the drone of the TV. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing at the sink, hands deep in suds, thinking, maybe I don't have to do the rest of my life alone. Maybe I get to have this too. Every now and then, a shadow would flicker across that thought. Once, when I asked about his ex, he leaned back and said, "Why would you want to talk about old mistakes? I don't look back. Some women are stepping stones to the life you really want, that's all." I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was being harsh about his past, not realizing he was drawing a map of how he saw me. By the time he proposed, I was so tired of being sensible that I let myself say yes like a teenager. He did it in my kitchen, of all places, after we'd eaten leftover Chinese food out of cartons. "Maya," he said, setting down his chopsticks, We're not kids. We know what we want. I want to build something with you, a real future. What do you say?" He pulled out a ring that sparkled far more than I expected. Later, I'd learn about the financing behind it. In that moment, I only saw the way it caught the kitchen light and threw tiny stars across the ceiling. I heard my own voice say, "Yes," and the sound of it surprised me. For a while, it felt like maybe I hadn't made a mistake. The first time I brought up the prenup, we were sitting at that same kitchen table, invitations spread out between the salt and pepper shakers. He was talking about venues, about wanting the reception at the bar he was this close to securing. "And," I said, heart thudding, "I want us to do a prenup." His head snapped up. "A what?" "A prenup," I repeated. "Just something simple to protect the house. I worked 20 years for this, Ethan. I can't risk losing it." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You think I'm coming for your house?" "That's not what I said." "It's what you're implying," he said. His voice had gone soft and flat in a way that made my stomach clench. I saw Daniel's face for a split second, heard his drunken slurs about what's mine and after everything I put into this marriage. I blinked the memory away. "I think we're grown," I said quietly. "We both have histories. You've got your investments. I've got my house. I just want us each to be okay no matter what happens. For Jasmine's sake, too." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed dramatically and shook his head. "Fine," he said. "If it makes you feel safe, we'll do it. I'm not planning on going anywhere anyway." The way he said, "makes you feel safe," stung, like I was some fragile thing clinging to a security blanket. Guilt washed over me, even though I knew I was being smart. He said he'd have his guy draw something up. I smiled and said, "Okay," pretending to feel reassured, and made a note to call Carla the next day. We met at a little diner, halfway between my house and her office. She slid into the booth with a stack of papers and an expression that said she'd seen every version of this story.
"Before you sign anything his guy drafts," she said, not even bothering with small talk, "let me see it. Better yet, let our firm draft it. He can have his lawyer look over it, but the first version should come from someone who actually cares if you end up living in your car at 65. "Is it really that bad?" I asked. She stirred sugar into her coffee. "Maya, you have a paid-off house, steady income, and a retirement account. He has what exactly?" "Potential," I said weakly. She snorted. "Right. Let's protect your actual assets from his potential." We went through every line together. House, mine before marriage, remains mine after marriage. Retirement, separate. Debts, each person responsible for their own, including business loans. Any joint venture, ownership determined by whose name is on the paperwork, not by who helped out. When Ethan came in to sign, he was all smiles and jokes. "Guess this is where you make sure I don't run off with your couch," he said, pen poised. "You couldn't lift it," I said lightly, heart hammering. He didn't read past the first page. He signed where they told him to, trusting that it was the same document his guy had approved before our changes. I told myself that was love. Now I know it was arrogance. On the morning of the wedding, my little house was full in a way it hadn't been for years. Hairspray clouded the bathroom mirror. There were bobby pins in my sink and lip gloss smudges on my coffee mug. Jasmine's laughter bounced down the hallway as one of her friends tried to wrangle the zipper on her dress. I stood in my bedroom in front of the full-length mirror, smoothing my hands over the bodice of my gown. It wasn't extravagant, lace and chiffon, simple and soft, but for me it was a miracle. I had never thought I'd wear white again, not after the first time ended the way it did. Jasmine came up behind me and fastened my mother's necklace around my throat. Her fingers shook a little. "Breathe," she whispered. "I am breathing," I said. "You're holding your breath like you're about to jump into a pool," she replied. I laughed and let my shoulders drop. The weight of the necklace was familiar and comforting. My mother wore it on every important occasion. I felt like I was bringing her with me down that aisle. As we lined up at the back of the church, my heart knocked against my ribs. The music started, something soft and traditional. The doors at the front opened for the bridesmaids. The world shrank to the length of the aisle and Ethan's silhouette at the altar. Just before my turn, I stepped into a side hallway to fix my veil. The air was cooler there, away from the crush of bodies. That's when I heard his voice. "Relax, babe," he chuckled, "somewhere just around the corner. She's just a placeholder. Once the bar is up and running and my credits fixed, we'll figure it out. I told you, this is just step one." My hand froze on the comb in my hair. I couldn't see him, but I could hear the smile in his voice, hear the soft murmur of whoever he was talking to on the other end of the line. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone, a mix of flirtation and conspiracy. Blood roared in my ears. For a moment, I considered walking around that corner, snatching the phone out of his hand and ending everything right there on the warped wooden floor of that church hallway. "Maya," the coordinator hissed from behind me, "you're on in 30 seconds. Are you ready?" I swallowed hard. My vision tunneled. I heard myself say yes, though nothing in me felt ready. I stepped back into the bridal suite and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. My face was pale under the carefully applied makeup. My eyes looked older than 45. I forced my lips into a smile, practiced and tight. Maybe I misheard, I whispered to my reflection. People say stupid things when they're stressed. Get through the day, you can figure it out later. Later would turn out to be a very complicated word. The doors opened, the music swelled. I took my father's old walking cane, not because I needed it, but because it felt like carrying a piece of him. And I walked down that aisle with my heart pounding and my mind chanting a single phrase, over and over. Don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. Ethan was waiting at the front, looking every inch the charming groom. When I reached him, he took my hands, his grip warm and firm. His eyes were bright, almost wet. To anyone watching, he looked like a man in love. The vowels blurred together. I repeated the words, heard the tremor in my own voice, and wondered how many women had stood where I stood, hearing one thing from the pastor and another from their gut. When we kissed, the room erupted in applause. His mouth was gentle, familiar by now. To the cameras, it looked like a promise. But to me, it tasted like a contract I hadn't fully read.
At the reception during our first dance, his touch felt different. He held me a little too tightly, like he owned me now. Like the paper we'd signed and the rings on our fingers had sealed something more than love. Every time someone clinked a glass and shouted, "To forever," all I heard in my head was placeholder.
Jasmine watched me from her table, her expression shifting between forced smiles and open worry. When I finally caught her eye, she mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded, because what else could I do in the middle of my own wedding? Then came that whisper at the photo op, the one that turned my doubts into conviction. "Relax," he said. "You're just a placeholder until my real life comes back." He meant for me to laugh, to shrug it off as dark humor, the way he shrugged off every cruel little thing he said. I didn't laugh. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who flipped burgers at a barbecue and called me rare, but the man on the phone in the church hallway. The man who saw my 20 years of working and saving as a step on his ladder. The DJ called for my speech. Glasses were filled. The photographer shifted for a better angle. phones tilted up to record what everyone thought would be a tearful thank you to my new husband. I stood, knees steady for the first time all day. I lifted my glass, the bubbles catching the light, and I looked at Ethan. He smiled broadly, raising his own glass back at me like we were in on the same joke. In that moment, I understood something that calmed me like a deep breath. He believed his own story so completely, he'd never thought to read the fine print of mine. I cleared my throat, heart finally settling into a slow, deliberate beat. "First," I said, my voice carrying over the room, "I want to thank everyone for being here." I heard myself sounding calm, almost cheerful, and it amazed me that my voice could behave while my heart was twisting like a towel being wrung out. And as I began, I remembered thinking, I know one thing with absolute certainty. He might think I was his placeholder, but I had already put my name on every line that mattered. The microphone felt strange in my hand, warm from the DJ, a little sticky where someone had touched it before me. The lights above the dance floor made it hard to see faces, but I could still pick out Jasmine's worried eyes, wide and searching. I saw Carla, farther back, at a table near the bar, giving me a soft, encouraging nod. She didn't know exactly what had just happened, but she could read people. She knew something was off. I took a breath and did what women like me are trained to do from childhood. I smoothed it over. "I'm not going to talk long," I said, smiling out at the room. "You all know I'm better with numbers than microphones." There was a polite little ripple of laughter. I could almost hear Ethan relax beside me, believing I was about to give the standard grateful bride speech and let his words slide into the dark corner of my memory where he hoped they would live and die. I turned to him, looking up at the man I had just promised forever to, and for 1 second, I thought about telling the truth, about repeating his whisper into the mic, letting the whole room hear it, letting every phone that was recording pick it up and send it bouncing around the internet. It would be so easy, I thought. Just 5 words. He called me a placeholder. My lips actually parted on the first syllable. Then I saw Jasmine's face again, and behind her, the nervous smile of my Aunt Denise, who had driven 3 hours on bad knees to be there. I saw my pastor, who had married us, and my neighbor, Mrs. Lee, who had brought her famous sweet potato pie because she was so happy you finally found someone, baby. I could not burn it all down in that moment. Not yet. Not like that. So I swallowed the truth and gave them something they could live with. I spent a long time thinking I'd never get another chance at this. So to have a room full of people who love us, who came to celebrate with us, it means more than I can say. Ethan squeezed my waist, pleased. To the guests, I know it looked loving. To me, it felt like a reminder. Stay in line. I want to thank my daughter Jasmine, I continued, feeling my throat tighten on her name. She grew up watching me work 2 jobs and fall asleep with my shoes on, and somehow still turned into the kindest, most funniest young woman I know. Jazz, you were my first forever. Jasmine's eyes shone. She pressed her lips together, fighting tears. And Ethan, I said slowly, thank you for believing we could build something new. He beamed because he heard the word believing and thought it was praise. He didn't know I was biting back the rest of the sentence, even when you were planning to walk on me. There was another round of applause. Glasses clinked. Somewhere, someone shouted, "Kiss! Kiss!" Ethan leaned in, and I let him press his mouth to mine, because that is what brides do when their guests are watching. What no one saw, not even him, was the tiny shift that happened inside me while everyone cheered. It was like a lever pulled in some back room of my soul, a quiet decision. You are not going to be left penniless and ashamed ever again, Maya. Not by him, not by anyone. The rest of the night passed in a blur of cake and music and small talk. People hugged us, pressed envelopes in our hands, told us we were perfect together. Ethan spun me around during the last dance, laughing, slurring a little from the open bar. I smiled on cue, thanked everyone, posed for pictures I knew I might hate looking at one day.
Later, when the DJ packed up and the lights came up and my feet ached in my shoes, we drove away with "Just Married" written on his SUV window and cans tied to the back. He reached across the console at a red light and laid his hand on my thigh. "You did good up there," he said. "I was afraid you were gonna cry or something." "I almost did," I said. He took that as a compliment. I turned my face toward the passenger window, so he couldn't see the change in my eyes. The night outside was dark and quiet, our reflection floating over the houses we passed. I saw us there, him grinning, me in a white dress, superimposed over the little street I had worked 20 years to afford. And I thought, with a calm that surprised me, if I'm just his placeholder, then he is just a chapter. And I have already learned how to turn a page. The next morning, when the dress was hanging in the closet and my feet were bare on the kitchen tile again, I opened my fireproof lockbox. I ran my fingers over the smooth edges of the prenup, the business papers with my name, the savings account statements. I didn't know the exact shape of what was coming, but I knew this much. He might try to use me, but he would not get to ruin me. Not this time. Marriage with Ethan didn't turn into a disaster overnight. It was slower than that. Softer. Like a drip under the sink you tell yourself you'll deal with tomorrow until one day your whole cabinet is swollen with mold. At first it was small things. He moved into my house temporarily because his lease was up, and why keep paying rent when we have space here? That's how he phrased it. We. Space. It sounded logical, loving even. Just until we find something bigger, he said, kissing my cheek as he set a box of his shoes in my hallway. I told myself it was normal. Married people live together. They mix their lives. They make room. So I made room. I cleared one side of my closet and watched as his shirts, all in similar blues and grays, swallowed up the empty hangers. I shifted my winter coats to the linen closet to make space for his suits, his workout gear, always tomorrow's routine, spread from one corner to another until my cozy bedroom started to look like a storage unit. My framed photos, the ones of me and Jasmine over the years, her in pigtails, missing teeth, her in her prom dress, her standing with me in front of this very house when we finally paid it off, got pushed further down the shelf to make room for his sports trophies, his framed article clippings about local real estate star makes good. It's just stuff, I told myself, sliding one of the pictures into a drawer when a frame fell and cracked. Stuff can be moved back. The first real clash, when he brought up joint accounts. "We're married now," he said one evening, dropping into the chair across from me at the kitchen table. I was reconciling invoices on my laptop. "We should stop acting like roommates with separate bills." He said it with a half laugh, but there was a sharpness underneath. "What do you mean?" I asked, already knowing. "Let's put our money together," he said. "One pot, one team. That's what this is, right? A team?" He reached over and tapped my spreadsheet. "You don't have to do all this solo anymore." I closed the laptop, buying myself a second. I've worked a long time to keep things stable. I just like knowing what's what. What if we keep our own accounts, but have one joint one for the bills? That way, nothing gets confused. His smile slipped, then snapped back on like a light he'd flicked. "Maya, you realize how that sounds, right? Like you don't trust me. Like you think I'm, what, after your money?" He didn't say, "like your ex," but I heard it anyway. My chest tightened.
I don't say I... He cut in. You keep bringing up protecting the house, protecting the accounts. I get it. You've been hurt. But I'm not Daniel. If you keep treating me like I'm your enemy, maybe we made a mistake. The word mistake hung between us. I felt that old reflex rise up. The one that says, if you don't bend, they'll leave. And you're too old and tired to start over again. Fine, I said softly. We can open a joint checking account for the household. But let's leave our savings where they are for now, okay? Just until we see how it goes. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, acting like he'd just made a big concession. Sure, I'm reasonable. Household account it is. He kissed my forehead and grabbed a beer from the fridge, humming as he walked away. I sat at the table feeling like I'd traded something I couldn't quite name for temporary peace. It didn't take long for the jokes to start. You should be glad someone still wants you at 45, he would say, laughing, when I complained about my knees aching after a long day. Imagine trying to date again with your schedule and those knees. He'd say it in front of people too, with that same playful tone. We're yin and yang, he told his friends at a cookout. I'm the fun one, she's the responsible one. If Maya had her way, we'd still be using that little TV from the Stone Age. Everyone laughed, even me, a little. But later, when I was alone, I'd hear the words without the laugh track.
You should be glad someone still wants you. Our arguments, when they came, were almost always about money. Or at least, that's what they seemed to be about. We need a bigger TV if we want to bring people here for the game, he said one Saturday, standing in my living room like a contractor evaluating a job site. Atmosphere matters. The one we have works fine, I said, and we just paid for the wedding. It's tiny, he said. Come on, we're not broke college students. He wanted a new truck for the business, something big and shiny that drank gas like water. He wanted to turn the garage into his office with built-in shelving and a fancy desk. He wanted to knock down the wall between the kitchen and living room to open the space up so he could host investor meetings at home. Every time I hesitated, he looked at me like I was personally strangling his dreams. You don't get it, he'd say. You've spent so long pinching pennies, you don't know how to grow. I'm trying to set us up for retirement. This is how people get ahead. How people get ahead, I said one night, is by not drowning in debt they can't pay back. He rolled his eyes. There you go again, our in-house accountant buzzkill. He used that line at a dinner with his friends. We were at a nice steakhouse, one of those places where they bring the meat out like it's a presentation. His friends' wives were talking about vacations they wanted to take. I mentioned wanting to go see Jasmine in her new city, and Ethan, without thinking, said, "You know Maya, she won't go anywhere unless she can find a coupon for it." Everyone laughed. I stared at my plate. Then he added, "She's our in-house accountant buzzkill. She keeps the fun from getting too expensive." They laughed again, louder that time, because it sounded like a joke. I smiled because that's what was expected. Later, in the car, he told me I was too sensitive when I brought it up. "If you can't take a joke, maybe stay home next time," he snapped. The bar became his obsession. He found a location he loved, a corner spot with exposed brick and a decent kitchen, and talked about it like a baby he was about to bring into the world. "This is it," he said, spreading the lease papers out on the kitchen table. "This is going to change everything for us." "For us?" I repeated slowly, reading the rent amount. It was high? "We'll get investors," he waved off. "I just need you to help me get the initial line of credit. Your credit score is beautiful, babe. They'll give us whatever we want." I felt my stomach knot. "Ethan, we just did a wedding. The honeymoon, the joint account, the new furniture. Those were expenses," he interrupted. "This is an investment. There's a difference." He wasn't wrong.
But investments can fail, I thought. Weddings can too. I'm not comfortable putting everything we have on the line, I said quietly. I can help with a smaller line of credit, something we can manage even if business is slow. And if we're doing this, my name needs to be on the lease. That's just smart for taxes. That last part was Carla's voice in my head, not mine. He hesitated, the first time I'd actually seen him think twice. My name should be on it, he started. It can be, but mine will be first. I'm the one taking on the credit risk. He drummed his fingers on the table. For a second, I saw something dark in his eyes, something calculating. Then he masked it with a laugh. Fine, he said. You want to feel like the boss on paper? Be my guest. I know who's really running the show. He signed where the landlord highlighted. I signed too, my hands steady. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thought, paper cuts deeper than people realize. The bar took shape. We spent evenings sanding tables, painting walls, arguing over light fixtures. There were moments it almost felt like a partnership. Then the cracks widened. One night Jasmine came by while a few of Ethan's friends were there. She listened to him talk about his bar, his customers, his vision. Did you tell them your wife is the one whose name is on the dotted line? She asked, not bothering to hide her edge. He laughed. Jealous? He said. You sound jealous. Of what? She shot back. Of a man who needs my mom's credit score to feel like a big shot? The room went quiet. Jazz! I hissed, my heart jumping into my throat. Ethan's jaw clenched. If you're going to live under my roof, you're going to respect me, he said, voice low. She stood up so fast her chair scraped. Under your roof? She repeated. You mean the house my mom bought without you? That night ended with a door slam and Jasmine driving back to her apartment earlier than planned. Ethan turned to me, eyes cold. Either she learns to respect the man of the house, or she doesn't need a key here. That hurt in a way I didn't show him. He was trying to draw lines between me and my daughter. I'd seen that playbook before. His phone became its own problem. Late-night texts, screen tilted away from me, quick exits to the hallway when it buzzed. I wasn't snooping at first. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Who keeps texting you this late? I asked one night in bed when the screen lit up again. He locked it without reading. Work stuff, he said. You know how it is when you're building something? Let me see, I said. He sat up, eyes flashing. Excuse me?
If it's work stuff, let me see, I repeated. I let you into every part of my life. Why can't because I'm allowed to have privacy, Maya? He snapped. This isn't prison. You don't get to monitor me like some kind of warden because your ex cheated on you. I flinched. He had just pulled Daniel's ghost into our bed, placed him between us like a shield. I didn't say, you didn't have to, he said. If you can't trust me, why did you marry me? I lay awake long after he started snoring, watching the shadow of his phone on the nightstand. The glow would come and go as messages arrived. Each light felt like a tiny match being struck in the dark. My position felt weaker by the week. My name was on the bar's lease. The line of credit had my signature. Ethan lived in my house now, his things everywhere. If he walked out tomorrow, I'd be the one left to pay the bills, to smooth things over with the bank, to explain to Jasmine how her mother had done it again. So I did what I knew how to do. I started keeping records. I bought a cheap spiral notebook from the grocery store and hid it behind the extra detergent in the laundry room. On the front page, in small letters, I wrote, "Household Notes." If Ethan ever found it, I wanted it to look boring. Inside, I wrote dates and details. The dinner where he called me a buzzkill. The night he told Jasmine to respect the man of the house. The times he came home smelling like a bar he didn't own yet. How much he insisted we pulled from the joint account for business expenses. Whenever I glimpsed a message flash across his phone, "Can't talk now," or "She's still awake," I wrote down the time. When he yelled, I wrote what he said. When he apologized, I wrote that too. At work, I made copies of the bar paperwork. Lease, license applications, loan documents. I put those copies in a plain manila folder and slid it into my locking file cabinet behind some boring payroll forms. Then I made an appointment at the bank. "I'm just here to update my beneficiaries," I told the woman in the navy blazer. Her name tag said Alicia. "And to make sure my accounts are set up correctly now that I'm married." She smiled and clicked around on her screen. "Congratulations," she said. "Second marriage?" "Yes," I said. She nodded like she'd heard that 1,000 times. "All right, so your personal savings and retirement are still in your name only. You have a joint checking with a small balance, and then this line of credit for the business, which you are the primary on. Your husband is a cosigner." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning, if something goes wrong," she said gently, "they come to you first." I felt that cold little stone drop into my stomach again. But then she kept talking. "It also means you have the most say," she added. "We can put limits in place. We can adjust how much is accessible at any given time. You aren't powerless here, Miss Thompson." On the way out, I asked a quiet question about the prenup. I didn't show it to her, but I described the main points. "That sounds solid," she said. "If it's written the way you're saying and properly signed, he doesn't have a legal claim to your premarital assets or to what the document's name is yours. Just make sure you keep good records." I almost laughed. Keeping good records was the one thing I knew how to do. When I walked back to my car, the sun was bright and hot on the asphalt, but I felt strangely cool inside. I sat for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel and whispered, "He has no idea how little he actually owns." That night, when Ethan made another joke about me being lucky someone like him was willing to take on a woman with baggage, I just smiled and said, "You might be more grateful than you realize." He didn't know what I meant, but I did. From that point on, every cruel comment, every late night, every dismissal went into the ledger I was keeping in my head. Ethan's cruelty was rising. So was my quiet, steady knowledge. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his witness. The real turning point came on a Tuesday night that started like any other. Leftovers for dinner, emails on our phones, a half-hearted conversation about weekend plans. He was scrolling and smiling more at his screen than at me. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Investors," he said, thumbs moving fast. "We're going to have a big night soon, you'll see." We ended up in a small argument about how much he was taking from the joint account for bar promotions that never seemed to translate into actual paychecks. Jasmine happened to call in the middle of it. I didn't mean to, but I answered with that sharpness still in my voice. She picked up on it instantly. "Is he there?" she asked. "Yeah, we're just talking." "In front of his phone?" she said dryly. "Must be an emergency if it's getting more attention than usual." I laughed, a bitter little sound. "Go to bed," I told her. "We'll talk later." After we hung up, Ethan shoved his phone in his pocket and grabbed his keys. "I'm going to the bar. Real work gets done there, not in Nagville."
"Ethan?" He opened the door. "You know what your problem is, Maya? You're still living like a single mom with a calculator. Try thinking bigger for once." The door slammed. His taillights disappeared down my street. I stood in the kitchen in the leftover silence for a long time. The clock on the stove blinked 9:17. A pan of half-eaten casserole cooled on the counter. The house smelled like tomato sauce and hurt feelings. I walked over to the dining table to clean up the paperwork he'd left scattered. As I lifted his laptop bag to set it on a chair, the strap slipped from my fingers. The bag hit the floor with a soft thud, and the laptop slid partially out, lid popping open with the jolt. The screen lit up. His email inbox stared back at me. For a second, I froze. I could have closed it, I could have told myself it was a violation, that I was better than snooping. I could have walked away and gone to bed and let my questions eat me alive for another few months. But I thought about that hallway in the church, that word placeholder. I thought about the way he'd been using my credit like a tool while treating me like a weight around his neck. My hands were shaking as I pulled the chair out and sat down. I'm just looking for a bill, I told myself weakly. Something for the bar, that's all. I clicked on a thread near the top of the inbox. The subject line said, our plan, smiley face. The first email I opened was from someone named Amber. She had written, "Tell me again why you had to rush and marry her. You know I hate thinking about you playing house with grandma." I stared at the word grandma. I scrolled. Ethan had written back, "Relax, babe. She's just a placeholder with good credit. Once the bar is solid and my credit's cleaned up, we'll figure it out. I told you, this is just step one. You're my real endgame." My heart thumped so loud I could hear it in my ears. The room felt suddenly too small, like the air had thickened. Placeholder with good credit. My eyes burned, but I kept reading. In another message, he joked about my coupon addiction and sad little house, that he was upgrading for her whether she liked it or not. Something ugly twisted in my stomach. Then there was an email to a man named Greg, whose signature tagged him as an associate attorney. Got her to sign the prenup my buddy drafted, so I'm in the clear later if I need to bail. Figure I can still go after a chunk of her assets since we'll be building the bar together and she's putting her name on stuff. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. My hand flew to my mouth. He thought we had signed the original version. The one his buddy drafted, the one Carla and I had gone over line by line at that diner. House, mine. Bar assets, default to me. Debts, each person responsible for their own. Ethan, in legal terms, owned nothing he thought he owned. I sat back, the chair creaking under me. The shock rolled through me in two waves. The first wave was pure pain, to see it all laid out like that. Not just the cheating, not just the name-calling, the planning, the way he spoke about me like a strategy, not a person. The second wave was something else. Cold. Clear. He didn't know. He had no idea the document he trusted was not the one in force. That all this time, while he'd been dreaming about getting a chunk of my house, my retirement, my life, the law had been quietly building a wall he couldn't see. I closed my eyes and pictured the prenup sitting in my lockbox. The one Carla and I had gone over line by line at that diner. House, mine. Bar assets, default to me. Debts, each person responsible for their own. Ethan, in legal terms, owned nothing he thought he owned. I should have felt triumphant in that moment, but instead, I felt oddly nauseous. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Even when you're protected, realizing someone you love was never planning to love you back hurts like hell. I got up, walked to my bedroom, and dragged the fireproof lockbox out from the back of my closet. My hands were steadier by the time I snapped it open and pulled out the old familiar stack of papers. I took them back to the kitchen table, sat down, and began reading by the yellow light of the overhead fixture. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. Every line I had remembered was there. Every safeguard Carla had insisted on. Every clause Ethan had skimmed past without understanding. By the time I reached the last page, it hit me fully. Everything he thought he was building on my back was actually stacked in my favor. He was the one standing on the trap door, not me.
I sat very still, the papers spread in front of me, and felt two versions of myself fighting inside. One wanted to curl up and cry all night, to mourn the man I thought I married, to scream and throw his laptop out the window. The other version, the one who had worked double shifts, who'd raised a daughter alone, who'd paid off a mortgage one stubborn check at a time, was quiet and very awake. I could walk away quietly, I thought. File for divorce, let the lawyers do their jobs, shut the bar down, move on. I had that option.
Or I could let him step all the way into the mess he'd made. I could let him invite his investors and friends, make his speeches, treat me like furniture a little longer. And then I could show him the fine print he never bothered to read. The anger settled into something steady, not a wildfire, more like a pilot light clicking on. I stood up, put the prenup back in the lockbox, and then paused. Going back to the laptop, I printed the worst of the emails. The ones where he called me a placeholder with good credit. The one where he laid out his timeline with Amber. The one bragging to Greg about how in the clear he was. I slid those pages into a plain white envelope. On the front, in careful block letters, I wrote one word: insurance. Then I walked to the pantry, moved the flour canister, and tucked the envelope behind it. When I pushed the flour back into place, my hands weren't shaking anymore. By the time Ethan stumbled in a couple of hours later, smelling like whiskey and other people's cologne, I was sitting on the couch watching an old show, an Afghan over my knees. "Hey, placeholder," he joked, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. "You mad at me?" I muted the TV and looked at him. Really looked. At the man who had no idea he'd just handed me the rope to tie up every loose end of the story. "No," I said calmly. "I'm not mad." And I realized in that moment, it was true. I wasn't mad. I was done. From that night on, my days had two layers. On the surface, I went through the motions. I got up, made coffee, answered emails, balanced ledgers. I kissed Ethan when he left the house, heard his stories about big nights at the bar and big talk from big money men, nodded and smiled at the right moments. Underneath, I was building my exit. The first person I told the truth to was Carla. "I need a lunch date, urgent, your office or anywhere with strong coffee." She picked a little cafe near her work, but when I walked in, she was waiting with a folder already on the table. She took one look at my face and said, "Tell me everything." Over salads we barely touched, I laid out the prenup, the emails, the bar documents, the line of credit. Her eyes darkened with each detail. "You were right to look," she said when I apologized for snooping. "You're not crazy. You're informed." "So what do I do?" I asked. My voice sounded small in that big question. She leaned back, tapped the prenup. "First, we confirm what you think this says. I'll have my boss give it an oversee too, but from what I'm seeing, you're in a better position than most women who walk into my office. That's the good news." "And the bad?" I asked. "The bad," she said, "is that lines of credit and leases are real. Even if the assets default to you, any outstanding debts tied to your name will follow you like a shadow. So we need a plan that minimizes new debt, locks down what you already have, and puts you in the driver's seat before he realizes the car isn't his." We spent the next hour mapping things out. Confirm the LLC paperwork. Make sure you're listed as majority owner for the bar. That gives you control over any decisions about restructuring or selling. "Done," I said. "I have a copy in my office." Move your remaining personal savings into an individual account he doesn't know about. If your name is the only one on it and the money came from before the marriage or from your own work, it stays yours. "I can do that this week," I said. Update the house deed into a living trust. Name Jasmine as your beneficiary. That way, even if something happens to you, he doesn't get to swoop in and claim the house because he was the husband. I swallowed hard at that. "Okay. And," she said, looking straight at me, "we'll draft a separation agreement now. We don't have to file it yet, but the day you're ready, you sign, I walk it to the courthouse, and he learns about it when the papers show up in his hands." I stared at the folder between us, then looked up at her. "Is it wrong?" I asked quietly. "That some part of me wants him to be in a room full of people when he finds out?" "Wrong?" she said. "No. Dangerous maybe, depending on the people, but wrong? Not after what he's done.
You're allowed to want the truth to be seen. We talked about safety, about what to do if he reacted badly, about changing locks, about making sure Jasmine knew where to go. Carla wasn't just thinking like a paralegal. She was thinking like a woman who had seen too many others blindsided. By the time I left her office, my arms were full of papers and my spine felt a little straighter. At home, I became an actress in my own life. I laughed at Ethan's stories about crazy nights at the bar and big talk from big money men. I smiled when he joked about leveling up once the bar was finally where it should be. Inside, I was counting every dollar he pulled from the joint account, counting every time he forgot to tell me about a new expense, counting every insult he tried to pass off as a joke.
Late at night, when the house was quiet and he was snoring beside me, I'd sneak out to the kitchen. I'd open my laptop, pull up old wedding photos on my phone, and stare at the woman in the white dress. "I'm sorry," I'd whisper to her. "I'm sorry you believed this was your last chance." Sometimes the tears came, not loud, heaving sobs, just a slow leak down my cheeks as I sat at the table with a mug of tea and a heart that was finally telling the truth to itself. One night, Jasmine came by unannounced. I heard her key in the door and panicked for a second, thinking it was Ethan returning early. "Relax, it's me," she called. Then she saw my face. "Oh, Mama," she said, dropping her bag and coming to sit beside me. "What did he do now?" I hesitated. I hadn't wanted to drag her into the details, but she was already in it, whether I liked it or not. "He's not who he pretended to be," I said simply, "and I'm not as trapped as he thinks." "What does that mean?" she demanded. "It means I protected the house," I said. "It means the bar is more mine than his, and it means I have a plan." Her eyes widened. "You have a plan?" she repeated slowly, like that was the best news she'd ever heard. Then her face clouded. "You're not going to back down, right? You're not going to let him sweet talk you out of it when the time comes?" "I don't think so," I said, and realized I meant it. "I'm tired, Jazz, tired of being the stepping stone. This time, I'm going to be the one who walks away with my head up." She grabbed my hand. "Whatever show you put on," she said, "I'll be in the front row." On Sundays, I started going back to church more regularly. Not because I needed anyone to tell me what was right or wrong, I had a pretty clear sense of that already, but because I needed a place to sit still and hear my own thoughts without Ethan's voice in my ear. One morning, after service, I lit a candle in the little side chapel. The wax was warm around the wick, the flames small but steady. "For my younger self," I whispered, "and for all the women who didn't have a Carla or a prenup." I felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle on me then. This wasn't just about my house or my bank account. It was about every woman who'd ever been told she was lucky anyone wanted her at all. Of course, plans like mine don't build themselves without stress. One evening, I was at the home printer, making extra copies of some of the bar's financial records to keep at work. I had just printed out a stack when I heard the front door open. "Babe, you home?" My heart jumped. The top page on the stack read, "Quarterly Sales Summary, Bar LLC," with my name at the top as owner. If he saw me copying those, he'd start asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Yeah, in here," I called, grabbing the first sheet I could find from the junk drawer, an old casserole recipe, and slapping it on top of the stack. He walked into the doorway, loosening his tie. "What you doing? Taxes already?" he joked. "Just printing some recipes," I said, lifting the top page and waving it. "Thought I'd try something new this week." He glanced at the paper, uninterested. "As long as it's not that lentil thing again, that tore my stomach up." I forced a laugh. "Noted." He kissed the top of my head and wandered off to the bedroom, leaving a trail of cologne and carelessness. My phone gave me another scare a few days later. Carla sent an email with the subject line, "Filing window options," outlining potential dates we could file the separation papers based on court schedules.
I was reading it at the kitchen counter when Ethan came up behind me, setting his beer down next to my elbow. "What's that?" he asked, leaning in. "Work email," I said quickly, clicking the phone screen off. "Client's tax deadline." "Must be nice," he said, "to have a little job where your biggest stress is numbers on a page." He had no idea I was currently calculating the interest rate on his karma. He started to notice I wasn't rising to his bait as much. When he made a cutting joke, I didn't try to defend myself. I just looked at him, let the comment hang, then changed the subject or walked away. The less I reacted, the more unsteady he became. He drank a little more, went out a little later, came home with more elaborate stories about big opportunities that always somehow needed just a little more money up front. One night, he stumbled in close to 2 a.m, the front door banging against the wall. "You awake?" he called, louder than necessary. "I am now," I said, sitting up in bed. He turned on the bedroom lights, squinting. "What, no how was your night, honey? No interest in your man's big deals?" "I'm sure you'll tell me all about them," I said, mildly. "Tomorrow, when you're sober." He bristled. "You're pulling away," he said, accusing. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't feel how cold you're getting?" I met his eyes. "Maybe I'm just not laughing at the same jokes anymore." He stared at me, then shook his head and flopped onto his side of the bed, mumbling something about ungrateful. The next morning, over coffee, he announced his latest idea.
"I'm planning a 1-year anniversary/investor appreciation dinner at the bar," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Big night, classy, suits, dresses, the works. It'll show people we're serious, that we're going places. I'll make speeches, bring in live music, a real event." Something in my chest clicked. A room full of people, a microphone, him, feeling invincible. "How can I help?" I asked. He looked surprised. "You're on board?" "Of course," I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. "If this is going to be our year, I want to support that. I can help with invitations, RSVPs, that kind of thing." He relaxed, smiling. "That's my girl," he said. "We'll invite my investors, a few of my friends, some of the regulars. You should invite some of your church friends too. Show them what we've built. Let them see you're not just some little bookkeeper anymore." "Okay," I said. "I will." Quietly, as I drafted the guest list, I added some names he hadn't considered. Carla, her boss from the family law firm. 2 of Ethan's creditors, whose names I recognized from his mail. The landlord. A couple of older women from church who had listened to me sing Ethan's praises before the wedding and who I knew had daughters and granddaughters of their own. If this fell apart, I wanted witnesses who knew both sides of me. The woman who had hoped and the woman who had finally drawn a line. The night before the event, I went to the bar alone under the pretense of checking on last-minute details. The staff were polishing glasses, testing the sound system, setting up extra chairs. When they were done and the place emptied out, I stayed behind. I walked slowly along the polished bar top, running my hand over the smooth wood. It smelled like lemon oil, spilled beer, and all the hours I'd spent there with a paintbrush in hand. I thought about the nights I believed this place was a symbol of our future together. About the afternoons I'd stood on a ladder, painting, while Ethan took important calls outside. I thought about the women who'd sat at this bar already, laughing at his jokes, thinking he was charming. And then I thought about the women who might be listening to my story one day, folding laundry or cooking dinner, wondering if they were someone's placeholder too. Tomorrow, you stop being his. The air conditioner hummed in response. Somewhere outside, a car drove by, the sound fading. I picked up a stray wine glass, turned it in my hand, and saw my reflection warped in the curve of the glass. "You are not their stepping stone, Maya," I told the woman looking back at me. "You're the one who decides where the path ends." The next night, the bar glowed like it had been waiting its whole life for this party. String lights zigzagged across the ceiling.
Small candles flickered on each table, throwing soft light on faces and drinks. A jazz trio played near the corner, saxophone weaving through the low hum of conversation. Ethan was in his element. He wore his best suit, the one he'd bought on credit and called an investment in perception. He moved through the room like a host in an old movie, shaking hands, clapping men on the shoulders, kissing women on the cheeks. "This is all us," he told anyone who would listen, sweeping his arm around to indicate the bar. "Our blood, sweat, and tears." He never once mentioned the name on the lease. I stayed near the edges at first, making sure the staff had what they needed, greeting people as they came in. Jasmine arrived in a simple black dress, hair in a neat bun, eyes alert. She hugged me and whispered in my ear, "I've got you." Carla came with her boss, both of them in understated professional clothes that wouldn't have looked out of place in a courtroom. She gave me a look that said, "Ready when you are." Ethan took the stage. Well, the small cleared space near the bar we called the stage. About an hour in, he clinked his glass with a spoon, grinned when the saxophonist faded out. "First off, thank you all for being here tonight. This past year has been a ride. When I first saw this place, it was basically an empty shell. But I saw potential. I saw what it could be. And now look at it." People clapped. He let the applause wash over him. "We're just getting started," he continued. "This is our year. We're about to level up in a big way. New deals, new partnerships, new everything." He laughed, that big charmy laugh he wore like a uniform. He talked about the bar's growth, about the community they were building. He praised his staff, named a few investors, made sure to give them credit for believing in him when this was just a dream. Then he gestured toward me. "And of course," he said, "I couldn't have done this without my beautiful wife, Maya." People turned to look at me. I smiled, small and polite. "She's the rock, our in-house accountant. Although, full disclosure, she has a panic attack if we go over budget by $5. The crowd laughed uncomfortably. I saw a couple of women exchange glances. Ethan chuckled. "I'm the visionary, she's the spreadsheet. It works." Jasmine's jaw tightened. Carla's face didn't change, but her eyes did. "And hey," he added, looking around the room, "once this next deal closes, we're going to be upgrading everything. Better lights, more space, maybe even bringing in a younger crowd in here." He winked. "No offense to all of us mature folks."
A few people laughed. A few didn't. I felt my face warm, but my fingers around my champagne glass were steady. I pressed the rim lightly against my lower lip and tasted the tart bubbles. "Anyway," he said, "you didn't come here to hear me talk all night. You came to drink, eat, and have a good time. But before we let the band get back to it, I want to bring up the woman behind the man, Maya. Come say a few words." He patted my hip as I passed him, like I was one of the staff he was dismissing from a table. I walked slowly, feeling every eye on my back. My heart beat calmly. I had already burned through the panic weeks ago. What was left now was something like peace. I took the microphone from him, and for a second our fingers brushed. His palm was a little damp. He smiled at me, all teeth, sure this moment was his. I turned to face the room. "Good evening," I said. "I promise I won't talk long. I know you'd rather get back to your drinks." Polite laughter. The band members shifted, waiting. "I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you to the staff who work long nights and early mornings to keep this place running. To the people who took a chance on this bar when it was just a half-painted room with a sticky floor. To the friends and family who showed up tonight to support us." I gestured around. People relaxed a little. This sounded like a normal speech so far. "I also want to tell you a little story," I said, "about a word. That got their attention. A year ago," I went on, "I was standing in a white dress in front of a room a lot like this one. Different lights, different music, same feeling. That night, between the pictures and the toasts, someone leaned in close to me and called me a placeholder. The word landed like dropped glass. I didn't look at Ethan, but I felt the room turn toward him instinctively. He shifted in his seat. I smiled through it, I said calmly, because that's what women my age are trained to do. We smile through all kinds of things. But I remembered it, and I thought about it a lot. I let the silence stretch, let the discomfort grow. Maybe some of you have felt like that, I said, scanning the faces, like you were just holding space in someone else's story until they got what they really wanted. Like your stability, your savings, your patience, your body, your time were just a bridge they planned to cross and then forget. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw a couple of women stare down into their drinks. I believed that word for a while, I admitted. I almost let it be true. I almost forgot who bought the house I live in, who worked the double shifts, who raised a daughter and paid off debt and saved for a rainy day. I took a breath, then smiled, not too wide this time, solid. And then, I said, I remembered something important. Placeholders decide when the page turns to. I saw Carla's lips twitch in the hint of a smile. So tonight, I continued, since we are all here celebrating our bar, I thought it might be a good time to tell you the truth about who's actually on the paperwork. I set my glass down on the bar behind me and pulled a folded document from my clutch. It wasn't the full set, just the summary page. The lease for this bar, I said, holding it up, lists me as majority tenant and owner. The liquor license? My name first. The business registration? Bar LLC, owned primarily by me with a smaller share for Ethan. I could feel Ethan's stare burning into the side of my face. I finally turned to look at him. His smile had frozen into something brittle. "That's not true," he said too loudly. "We're partners." "We are," I agreed. "Just not the way you thought." Laughter bubbled up from somewhere in the back, quickly covered by a cough. "The line of credit for this business is in my name as primary, with Ethan as co-signer, which means the bank comes to me first if things go wrong, and it also means the bank listens to me when I tell them no more debt on my signature." A flicker of something like panic crossed his face. "But this isn't just about the bar," I said. "It's about the home I invited Ethan into. The retirement I was building before he ever flipped a burger at that barbecue where we met. So I want to talk about one more document." I reached into my clutch again and pulled out another folded paper. I didn't wave it around, just held it, weighty, in my hand. "Before we got married," I said, "we signed a prenup. Some of you might think that sounds unromantic, but I had already been through one divorce. I didn't have the luxury of pretending that love alone pays the bills." A few heads nodded. I knew I wasn't the only divorced person in that room. Ethan asked his friend to draft the first version. It was very generous to him. Luckily, I have a friend too.
I nodded toward Carla. She lifted her glass slightly. "She works at a family law firm," I said, "and she suggested we revise a few things before I signed. So we did. We protected the house I bought long before Ethan came along. We made sure the bar's assets defaulted to me in the event of separation. We agreed that each of us would be responsible for our own debts. And then Ethan signed without reading the final version." A few people gasped quietly. Even the saxophonist looked stunned. "That's a lie," Ethan burst out, standing up so quickly his chair scraped. "You're twisting things. This is not the time or place for this, Maya." "You're right," I said softly. "The time and place would have been before you started writing emails about how you were going to marry me, use my credit, get the bar profitable, and then divorce me for a share of my house." The room went dead silent. You could have heard the ice in the glasses cracking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I pulled out the plain white envelope labeled insurance, opened it, and slipped out the top page. I'm not going to read every word.
I said, out of respect for the people here who did nothing wrong. But I will summarize. I held the page where I could see it, but they couldn't. You called me a placeholder with good credit. You told another woman this marriage was just step one. You told your lawyer friend you were sure you could get a chunk of my assets later because I'd signed the prenup your buddy drafted. You laid out a timeline. Marry, build, bail. Murmurs swelled and broke around us like waves. Ethan's face had gone from red to a kind of blotchy white. You went through my email, he demanded. You violated my privacy. You're insane. You called me grandma, I said quietly. And you plan to take everything I spent my life building. I think we're even on the violation front. A woman near the bar put her hand over her mouth. One of Ethan's supposed investors looked very interested in his drink. I'm not insane, I continued. I'm informed. And I came here tonight to tell you, in front of God and everybody, that I am done being anyone's placeholder. I turned slightly to address Ethan directly. Earlier this afternoon, I said, while you were getting your hair cut and practicing your speech in the mirror, yes, I heard you, I met with Carla and her boss at the courthouse. We filed for legal separation. As of now, you no longer have access to my accounts. The bank has been informed to not extend any further credit on my name or on the bar's without my express consent. He took a step toward me. You can't do that, he said, voice low and dangerous. This is my bar, my life. You can't just take it away. I felt Jasmine move closer, standing just behind my shoulder. Carla had also stepped forward a bit, her presence solid and calm. You helped build it, I said, and you got paid for that work. But on paper, on the documents you signed without reading, this bar belongs to me. I looked out over the room again. So for those of you who have money tied up in this place, you should know that I will be restructuring. I'll be meeting with an accountant to assess the actual numbers. Some of you may get calls. You do not need to go through Ethan for that conversation. A couple of men avoided eye contact. Another gave a slow, almost impressed nod. Ethan sputtered. You're humiliating me in front of everyone after everything I've done for you. You did a lot for yourself. You gave me laughter when I needed it. You gave me company when my house was too quiet. For that, I'll always be grateful. I paused. And then, you gave me truth. You gave me the word I needed to finally see myself clearly. Placeholder. I let it hang there one more time. If I was just a placeholder in your story, Ethan, I said, voice steady as bedrock, consider this your last page. I set the mic down carefully on the bar. The feedback squealed for a second, then cut off. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of someone shifting in a chair. Then Jasmine started to clap. Slow and deliberate. Carla joined her. Then someone else. The sound grew, not wild, not raucous, just firm. People who had seen enough. People who recognized a woman drawing a line. Ethan's mother, who had been sitting near the back, put her hand to her chest. I watched her mouth form the words, I told him, to the woman beside her. I told him not to play with people's lives. Ethan looked around like a man who had just realized the building was on fire and that everyone else had known for a while. Are you people serious? He shouted. You're taking her side? You don't know the whole story. I know enough, one of his investors said quietly, standing and setting his napkin on the table. We'll be in touch, Miss Thompson. He nodded at me, then walked out. I didn't watch the rest of them file past. I picked up my glass from the bar, took one small sip, then set it back down. And then I did something very simple. I walked out. My head was high, my hands were steady. Jasmine and Carla flanked me, one on each side, like my own personal honor guard. Behind us, the jazz trio started packing up their instruments.
In the weeks that followed, Ethan's world shrank the way a balloon does when you let go of the end and it zips around the room, losing air. The separation papers arrived at the house he was crashing at, a friend's place at first, then his elderly mother's when the friend's wife decided she was, quote, tired of the drama. I didn't see his reaction in person, but from the voicemails he left me, I could imagine.
The first few messages were all disbelief. "This is crazy, Maya," he said. "We had a fight, that's all. You're overreacting. Call me back." When I didn't, they turned sweet. "I know I messed up," he said in another. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll block Amber. I'll do whatever you want. Don't throw everything over some emails." Those last 4 words told me everything. In his mind, the betrayal lived in the messages I'd found, not in the plan they revealed, not in the years of jokes and jabs and calculations. When the sweetness didn't work, he pivoted to anger. "You ungrateful hag," he spit out in one voicemail. "Without me, you'd still be sitting in that little house clipping coupons alone. You think you're better than me now? Enjoy your bar. Let's see how long you keep it without my charm." Carla had told me not to delete anything. "If he gets threatening, we'll have it on record," she said. So I saved them. All of them. Even the ones that made my stomach twist. The bank was polite but firm when Ethan tried to pull more money from the line of credit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," the woman on the phone said, just as polite as the one in the blazer had been with me. "We'll need Miss Thompson's written authorization for any further extensions or withdrawals beyond what's already been agreed upon." He called me about that too. "You went to the bank?" he demanded. "You're trying to sabotage me." "I went to protect myself," I said. "The same thing you've been trying to do this whole time. I just did it honestly." He cursed and hung up. I temporarily closed the bar for restructuring, just like I'd said. There were notices on the door, polite emails to regulars, stiff conversations with staff. "I'm not shutting you out," I told the bartenders and servers. "I'm trying to make sure this place can still be here 6 months from now." Some thanked me. Some were understandably angry and scared. I couldn't fix it all. But I could sit with them at the empty tables, show them the real numbers, and tell them the truth. With the help of an accountant Perla recommended, we went through every receipt, every invoice, every reported sale. We discovered just how much of Ethan's vision had been paid for with other people's money and just how little was actually coming in. In the end, we sold off some equipment, renegotiated the lease, and cleared as much of the debt as we could. There wasn't a windfall. There was no Cinderella moment where I became a millionaire off his back. What there was relief. Relief when I paid off the line of credit tied to my name and watched the balance drop to 0. Relief when I walked into the bank and closed the joint checking account, signing the papers with a pen that didn't shake. Gossip did what gossip always does. It spread. Some people took his side. "Poor Ethan," I heard a woman say at the grocery store when she didn't know I was in the next aisle. "She humiliated him in public. A man never comes back from that." Others had seen enough of him around town to be less generous. "I'm shocked it took her this long. I saw him at that bar flirting with anything that moved, and on her dime, Hugh." A few women reached out to me directly. They messaged me on social media or pulled me aside after church. "I heard what happened," one said. I sauced. "My ex did something similar. I didn't have a prenup. I lost the house. I wish someone had told me to protect myself." "I'm proud of you," another whispered. "You did what a lot of us can't." Jasmine, the other woman, disappeared from his story as soon as she realized the bar and the house were not his stepping stones to riches. The emails went quiet from her end. Whatever promises he had made her dried up along with his access to my assets. Legally, the prenup did exactly what it was supposed to do. He left with his personal belongings, some small savings from his past deals, and whatever he could scrape together freelancing for other agents. No share of the house, no claim on my retirement, no ownership stake in the bar. "You sure you don't want to go after spousal support?" Carla asked, half joking. "I'm sure. I don't need him paying my bills. I just need him out of them." Jasmine moved back in with me for a little while after everything settled. Not because I needed a roommate financially, but because we both needed the company. "We can be like college roommates," she said, carrying a box of her stuff into the now empty room that used to be Ethan's. "Except one of us is always in bed by 10 and the other sings off-key in the shower."
We repainted that room together.
The dark blue accent wall Ethan had insisted on became a soft, warm cream. His posters and framed jerseys were gone. In their place, we put up simple art, a bookshelf, a little lamp with a yellow shade. We boxed up the last of his things, odds and ends he hadn't come back for, and mailed them to his mother's address. No note inside, just objects, separated from the story he'd tried to wrap them in. When we were done, we stood in the doorway and looked at the room. "It feels lighter," Jasmine said. "So do I replied. Life didn't become a fairy tale after that. Bills still came. The car still needed maintenance. There were mornings my knees hurt and evenings I felt lonely. But the loneliness was different now. It wasn't the loneliness of lying next to someone who thought of you as a temporary bridge to better things. It was the quiet of a house that belonged to me again. Every square foot paid for and claimed. Months later, I sat on my small back porch as the sun went down, a mug of chamomile tea warm in my hands. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint sweetness of someone grilling down the street. Neighborhood kids rode bikes up and down the sidewalk, their laughter rising and falling like little waves. My phone buzzed. A photo from Jasmine, her in her new apartment, surrounded by friends, smiling so wide it made my heart feel too big for my chest. "Game night at my place," her text said. "We're good, Mama, really good." I smiled, saved the picture, and set the phone down on the little side table next to my chair. Inside, the house hummed softly. The fridge, the radio in the kitchen playing an old love song, the washing machine spinning in the hallway. No heavy footsteps, no raised voices, no tension hanging in the air like a storm that never breaks. The wedding album was tucked away in a box in my closet. I hadn't burned it. I didn't need to. Those pictures were proof, not of my foolishness, but of my courage. I had walked down that aisle once, and I had walked back out again when I realized what waited at the other end. I found myself thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what I'd gained. Not just the house and the bar and the savings account. Those were important, yes, but the real gain was quieter. I had gained my own respect. I had come so close to trading all of it, the security, the little life I'd carved out of hard years, for the illusion of being chosen. I thought being picked by a man like Ethan meant something about my worth. It took his worst words to remind me that my worth had been there all along. In the nights I stayed up with the sick child. In the mornings I clocked into jobs tired but determined. In the decisions I made to protect a future no one else was thinking about but me. I started volunteering once a week at a women's center in town. It began with them asking me to help with budgeting workshops. Just simple things like how to track expenses, how to read a pay stub, how to understand a lease. Over time, some of the women started lingering after class, asking quieter questions. What does a prenup actually do? What happens if his name is on everything and mine's not? What do I do if I think he's using me? I didn't dump my whole story on them, but I shared pieces when it felt right. I once thought love and paperwork didn't belong in the same sentence. Now I know they absolutely do. Someone who loves you isn't afraid of protecting you or protecting yourself. We laughed sometimes, we cried sometimes, we learned to read fine print together. One afternoon after a workshop, I met Carla for coffee. We sat by the window, cups between our hands, watching people rush up and down the sidewalk. "You ever think about writing this down? Like in a book or something? How Not to Be a Placeholder by Maya Thompson." I snorted. Who would read that? "A lot of women," she said. "More than you think. I'm too busy filling my own life now," I replied. But the idea didn't sound as ridiculous as it would have a year earlier. We laughed, easy and real. That night, as I cleared the dishes from my small, well-loved kitchen counter and wiped it down, I thought about the women listening to my story somewhere, maybe standing at their own sinks, maybe sitting on their bed, phone propped up, hands folded in their lap. I thought about the ones who were feeling that familiar whisper in their ear. "You're lucky anyone wants you. You're just a placeholder. You're just a bridge. And in my mind, in Auntie May's gentle but firm tone, I offered the one moral this whole messy story had given me. If someone tells you you're just a placeholder in their life, don't argue with them. Just remember you're the one holding the pen, and you have every right to write them out of your story.